Good morning to those dialing in from the UK, and good afternoon to those watching this webinar from the UAE. Welcome. This is the UAE UK Business Council's third webinar this week on skills, and today's session is going to focus on UK and UAE perspectives on women in skills, particularly on how to attract more women into the workforce in terms of vocational and technical skills, and how to retain them and support them in terms of their long-term career development. And this is in the context of societal changes in both countries, the changing needs of industry and employers, and the impact of AI and other technologies on the workforce. So today's webinar is going to look at the barriers that might hinder the women achieving their potential in the workforce, and the opportunities, and particularly the opportunities for collaboration between the UK and the UAE on developing strategies for attracting more women into the workforce. Today's webinar will be followed later this year by a white paper that the UAE UK Business Council will be publishing, which will identify in more detail some of those opportunities. So I'm now going to hand over to the moderator for today's event, Eleanor Slinger. Eleanor is a Senior Financial Services Lead at LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. She's also a Non-Executive Director of the UAE UK Business Council. So Eleanor, I'd like to hand over to you so that you can introduce your fellow panelists and then start the discussion.
Thank you, Brad. Good morning, good afternoon to our panelists and our viewers joining us in the UK and the UAE, and hopefully further abroad. Today, we convene to explore a pivotal and timely topic: women in skills, qualifications, and assessment. The discussion is not merely about statistics and quotas. It's about working together to shape the future of work, education, and societal progress, recognizing that we are at the crossroads of a huge technological advancement and societal transformation. The role of women in non-traditional education pathways, particularly in STEM, technical and vocational fields, has never been more critical. And in the UAE, the government's commitment to empowering women is evident through initiatives like National Policy for Empowering Emirati Women 2031, which aims to integrate women into the labour market and future sectors, an advanced skills strategy focusing on lifelong learning and future skills development. The UAE can proudly boast 44.5% of its engineering undergrads are women, the highest globally, and UK is at 18% and Germany at 20.8%. So today's discussion will dive into and uncover how both nations are fostering environments that support women's participation in the workforce, particularly in sectors traditionally underrepresented by women, and how these efforts are paving the way for a more inclusive and resilient future. I'm Eleanor Slinger. I'm a UAE UK Business Council Non-Executive Director and a LinkedIn Senior Financial Services Lead. I actually started my career as a pharmacist in Australia and New Zealand. It never occurred to me that there were any barriers, and now I've pivoted into marketing and sales. And it's confidence that explores freedom and the freedom to do so. So I think today's panelists will help me to discuss what we can do to support the women of the future and women today who look to pivot into non-traditional sectors. My speakers and my panelists today, we have Fazela Gopalani. She's a partner at EY. Fazela leads the business transformation strategies, particularly in the areas of education and workforce development. She's leading on building key partnerships with government, business enterprises, and educational institutions. Next to her, we've got Jonathan Ledger, Skills and Professional Bodies Specialist, Department of Business and Trade. Jonathan works with the UK government to support and expand the role of professional bodies in shaping the workforce of the future, with a focus on inclusivity and skills development. And we've got Alan Howard, welcome, who is head of Commercial and International City and Guilds. City and Guilds is a vocational educational organization that focuses on skills development through training, qualification, and apprenticeships. They partner with various organizations to deliver high quality training and development solutions. And last but not least, we have wonderful Samantha Rolls, MD Mobility and Emergency Services at Serco, a FTSE 250 company. This includes fire and rescue advisory, training and operations. And Samantha is championing gender equality in these traditional male-dominated sectors. So we have a wonderful group of speakers today, and what we're going to do is jump straight into some questions. We're going to focus and start with Fazella. I would love to hear a bit more about your own journey in the UAE and the UK, Fazella, and what has been the most significant cultural or structural challenge you faced as a woman forging a career, specifically in accounting and finance. How did you navigate them?
Thank you so much, Eleanor, and thank you to Bradley Jones and the UAE UK Business Council for this opportunity and this fantastic webinar broadcast, I think we're calling it. In short, if I could just quickly tell you about my career, and then that will go on to what were the challenges and then how did I navigate them. So didn't really get a choice about what profession I wanted to go into. My father was an accountant, and a typical sort of Indian family, you've got to have a accountant, a doctor, and a lawyer. So I was the accountant. Male-dominated industry for sure. My father passed away suddenly from pancreatic cancer when I was 23 years old, and I took over managing and running his accounting practice at a time when all the staff were men. All my clients were men. I then sold it 7 years later after running and managing it to come to the UAE and decided that I didn't want to be an accountant anymore. I wanted to go into education, and that's where I started my journey. And I've worked at PwC. I'm now a partner at EY, heading up an academy. And in between, I was the head of a global professional body, ACCA, for the Middle East and Eurasia. So I'm going to go through 4 challenges. First of all, goodness gracious me, it's not easy being a woman in a man's world where there's a boys' club culture, navigating that male-dominated boardrooms, meetings, dinners. And I think the key there to how I navigated that was numbers never lie. And I'm not just saying that because I'm an accountant. Performance. When you talk in that room about performance, how you've driven results, the impact and outcome, and then you demonstrate that with numbers, that really helps in the conversation about showing what you have been able to do. Number 2, when you're in a room full of men, it is sometimes ever so daunting and difficult for a woman to speak up. Or to be heard, or to be given a chance to speak and not interrupted. What I learned quite early on in my career was I had to learn not just how to say things that matter, but how I say it is also ever so important. So the tone, the clarity, and how I portray myself confidently. And I had to be my own cheerleader because nobody was going to say, oh, Fazila's done great work there. Let's take that into consideration. Number 3, I had to develop an elevator pitch because the challenges are you've got 30 to 50 seconds, about 20 to 30 words to make an impact to a lawyer, to a bank manager, to a man in the corporate accounting and finance world. And I saw that I literally only had 20, 30 words to grasp their attention for me to establish my credibility. And that had to be done early on. So I really had to navigate that with, hi, my name's Fazila Gopalani. I am a partner at EY, heading up EY Academy. And that just sets the tone. And I think that's ever so important to do because immediately they don't really want to know where you're from. They just want to know, they don't really even want to know your name. They want to know where is it that you work and what field are you in? Yeah. And the last point I would say was my ACCA qualification. With all due respect, those 4 letters after my name, ACCA, and then the MBA, and then the bachelor's, it proved to them, whether that was on my business card or anything, that I've got a solid technical background. And that increased my confidence and it made me be able to earn that respect in those conversations. So skills, qualifications really gave me that extra edge. So sorry for the long answer, but those are my 4 sort of challenges that I've found within my career, still do, and then how I've navigated it.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing your story. And I think a lot of women can relate to that, but I love the elevator pitch. Next to you, Samantha, I'd love to hear a little bit about you because, you are one of the first women or the first woman managing director at Serco Middle East, I understand. And, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your journey and how you're supporting the next generation of females.
Yes, thank you. I think personally, I've had a real mix of good and bad managers and leaders throughout my career, and that includes both men and women, by the way. But what I've always been a big believer in is my capabilities. So I've always voted with my feet when it's come to moving on from companies or people that do not align with my own integrity, values, and beliefs. And I really do encourage others to be brave and bold when it comes to, sort of setting your own boundaries and holding them. Because by not accepting behaviours that don't align with our own boundaries, we show everybody else that they can do the same. And I think it's only by sort of a movement in this area that we can make real change. In terms of being the first female MD at Serco, I mean, firstly, it's ridiculous, by the way, that it took 2021 to make that happen. But secondly, I would just say it wasn't by luck or by accident. It was definitely intentional. I found a manager at my previous company who saw the talent and the capabilities within me, and he gave me a seat at the table at a time when I was doing the work, I was contributing strategically to the leadership team, but I wasn't actually on it. But he gave me that seat at the table, and most importantly, he didn't tell me, I didn't need any sort of initiative within the organisation to get that. He didn't tell me I needed to be more confident. He didn't tell me I needed a man to shadow me. He didn't tell me I needed to gain more experience. He just gave me a platform and he really allowed me to fly. And then when he moved on from my previous company to become the CEO of Serco, I followed him onto our executive team here. And I think that that's really important because I think when you find someone like that, especially a male in such a senior role, that you really want to sort of grab onto them. They say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think together with him, we've really driven a culture of just making it happen. Our executive team here at Serco quickly went from, only one person on the exec team to being 50% women. And not because of any sort of positive discrimination, just because they were really talented people who were the right people for the job that just hadn't been given the opportunity before. And I think people still today have conversations with me where they tell me that you can't be a woman in this region in senior roles because of the challenges around dealing with potentially, senior nationals and different cultural differences. But I make it my mission to prove them wrong every single day. I have great relationships with these people, both in the UAE and Saudi. And as Fazila said, I let my results speak for themselves. When I took on the business, since I've taken on the business, I've doubled the size of it in 3 years. And I've took it from a break-even position to a significantly profit-making position. So I think that that's sort of testament that women can be in senior roles in this region. And I think we can sort of complain about where we are as a region or culturally or socially, or we can just be part of the change and get on with it. And I think sort of part of my mantra and what I try and do as part of leading the Serco Inspire within our division is I just want to make it easier for women who are coming behind me. I don't want women that are coming out of university, looking at what careers to go into, to face the same, some of them really awful challenges and experiences that I've had throughout my career. So that's really important to me.
That's really interesting. Having run a company also in the Middle East, I would agree with you. There is no barrier in terms of working with men in the UAE. If anything, it can be an advantage because you stand out from the crowd in some circumstances. I want to pivot to you, Jonathan. I'm really interested because I've seen on your profile you've run several businesses yourself. You obviously work within the government, but I'm keen to understand how important mentorship and sponsorship is to encourage and support and shape careers for females. Are you able to comment on that?
Thank you very much indeed. A real pleasure to be with you all, and it's always good to be working with UK-UAE Business Council, Bradley and the team. Even what's been said so far is really inspiring. I think as we kind of go through life, I always think of what we do as almost like jumping lily pads. We're all hopping from one to the next, taking our skills, trying to get to the other side. Hopefully there's some green grass of retirement on the other side. And to do that, it's a journey, and that journey needs sometimes, somebody to lean on, and male and female kind of have to think about how they get some support from other people to be able to do that. And I think mentorship plays a vital role in encouraging and supporting and shaping careers for females by helping to address some barriers that might disproportionately affect women in the workplace. And I'm thinking really here about things like building confidence. So, for women that are not so confident, because, not everyone's confident, right? And I say women, but actually it does apply to everyone, of course. But, we're talking about women this morning particularly. So, mentors really help women, I think, navigate self-doubt and, any thoughts of imposter syndrome and common challenges in a male-dominated industry. And I've worked in the mining sector, for example, where, it's really a kind of white male orientated set of industries. And, you have to have mentees that are really going to encourage and bring on women and put them in centre roles and kind of give them that platform and stage and support that goes with it. I think the other part is around skills development, thinking about personalised feedback that really focuses on overcoming those barriers and building that confidence is really important. And that, identifies growth opportunities and, performance and leadership. And Samantha was talking about, the CEO role. For me, it's about, can you do the job, right? It doesn't matter what you are, male or female, whatever. You've really got to just, is it about competence and the capability to do that job? And that's where I think the skills development bit comes in, because you can really sharpen your saw. I think the other thing is, in a male-dominated industry, sometimes it's difficult to navigate organizational culture. And so having a mentee that can guide you through some of that and, overturn some of those unwritten rules, because that's the worst bit, is the unwritten rules part and all the old boys club type scenario. So I think mentees can share insights about these unwritten workplace norms, helping women to avoid missteps and better integrate into professional environments. And then I think, the final part of that is around mentees can really help women set realistic but ambitious goals and to stay accountable in pursuing them. Yeah. Finally, I'd just like to kind of get people to think about sponsors as well. So it's not just mentees, but sponsorship around advocacy and access. And sponsors are different from mentors because they actively promote and advocate for their protege's advancement. And so I think we're talking about things that where sponsors help women get promoted by putting their names forward for high visibility projects and leadership roles. So this is a role that men can take in encouraging women to really focus on those high achieving roles and really climb that ladder. I think the other part is around the sponsor's influence to open doors to exclusive networks and decision-making circles that women can access that they might not otherwise get into, and then building credibility, when you've got a powerful figure that endorses a female professional, it really kind of helps to legitimize. And this is some of what Samantha was saying. It's about identifying the right people that can kind of give you the right access or the right leg up, for the right reasons as well. So, all of these things are about for the right reason, because, in my eyes, women are brilliant leaders and should just be able to climb that ladder. But of course, you're dealing with a long history, wherever you are in the world. So I think, mentors are really about just unlocking that potential and opening those doors.
Thank you. And we'll talk a little bit about those policies and practices and come back to you. But I wanted to ask Ellen a little bit about City and Guilds and how your organisation helps with global skills development. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about how it is helping to support women in skills, specifically in the UK.
Well, thank you, Eleanor. It's wonderful to be part of today's session. So thank you for letting me be here. So many people will have heard of City and Guilds, but might not be aware of some of the detail of what we actually work through. So we've been around for nearly 145 years. We're actually a registered charity. We hold a royal charter. In fact, our president is the Princess Royal. not something that everyone's familiar with. And we are well known for our work in the UK, but we also work all around the world with governments, corporate organisations and providers, and we're delivering essentially skills development solutions that can be from our qualifications, accreditation schemes, leadership and management, and consultancy, for example. We actually do have a strong presence in the UAE as well. And we've been there for a number of years. We've got a team in Dubai. We work across the Middle East and working on those education and skills solutions that ultimately support skills development pathways. So it's a really interesting topic to discuss today. It's actually a really important part of City and Guilds in terms of women in skills and a lot of the advocacy work we do. In fact, I also just wanted to mention that we have a City and Guilds Foundation, and the foundation amplifies the goals and activities of the wider City and Guilds charity, and it specifically focuses on high impact social investment, recognition, and advocacy programs. And today's topic does play into that well. So if I can continue, then Eleanor, just kind of thinking through some of the activities that we're involved in. So as a skills development organisation, and inherently, it's an important part of our development process, if you'd like, to ensure that we enable as broader participation as possible in those, making sure we're opening up opportunities, champion learning pathways, ensuring that everyone, has, through inclusive qualifications, especially in traditionally more male-dominated fields like engineering and construction, which we're well known for in terms of our vocational provision. But I just want to mention a City and Guilds Impact Report is something we do every year, and I'll pop a link into the YouTube chat later, so if you want to access that. But that specifically has a section of women in skills, highlighting the work that's going on to improve, if you like, gender representation, supporting women in developing vocational and technical skills, and that in itself, accessing skills training can provide that empowerment, which can often be a barrier that we need to work hard at unlocking and providing the opportunities. And I mentioned earlier about the foundation at City and Guilds. So essentially the foundation has that theme of overcoming barriers and equality, and through the work of the foundation, we support a lot of initiatives such as bursaries, which have helped to support women enter into STEM industries. Eleanor, you mentioned that right at the beginning, and also, for example, we funded the setup of a first construction workshop in a women's prison in the UK, which alongside other more traditional areas, but that was a great opportunity to break down some of those barriers. The foundation also actually delivers the Princess Royal Training Awards, and that's where organisations are recognised for essentially demonstrating excellence in training. And a lot of the recipients of those awards have developed programmes specifically aimed at women in skills. And there's a good example of the organisation called Amy, who the construction engineering, they were trying to support more of their workforce into the female workforce into senior leadership roles. It was an aspiration to do that. So they actually asked the women that were interested in that, what is it they need? What is it that they would benefit from? And it was areas like, improved confidence, visibility, strategic skills, commercial skills, just an awareness of the career development opportunities. And they developed a program around this. And ultimately, that was successful in achieving one of our Princess Royal Training Awards to recognise that. And I think as the City and Guilds, part of our skills remit, the role that we play, a big part of that for us is around advocating, influencing, and celebrating access to skills that create some of that equality that I think we're all talking about today.
Yeah. That's great. That's really interesting, because the next question I think will help with answering some of those things as well. Fazella, are you able to sort of share in your view what practical steps organizations can take to create that inclusive environment that Alan was talking about? And what sort of what examples have you seen, especially in traditionally male-dominated sectors?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I think first and foremost, it's so important to normalize flexible working. As a mother of teenage kids and, having children who are younger, to be able to have that flexibility at work is so important. And I do believe that organizations need to normalize. It's okay to work from home. It's okay to go pick up the kids and come back after you've dropped the kids in the morning. Secondly, I think establishing visible female role models who are also mentors, so that the younger females can see that this is my trajectory, this is where I'm going towards. I do say quite often on many different panels that we need to train leadership. And when I say train leadership, I mean we need to train the men in how to manage and lead women. So there are so many conversations that go about women and what are we doing to upskill ourselves, to become more educated, to get more skills and qualifications, certifications. But actually, what are the men doing in the workplace to understand how to lead us, how to manage us, how to support us, how to empower us? I do, lastly, and I see this at EY, is creating a safe space and an open dialogue and a community. Yes, women help women. And yes, we do need those types of events or get-togethers or breakfast sessions or coffee sessions where we support each other. But the dial will not change with just women being in a room discussing and talking. Men have to get into that room to understand the challenges that we are going through within the workplace to then be able to support us with making a difference. And so those are my couple of things. At EY, we do have a Women in Finance initiative, flexible working hours and they're normalized for men and for women there. So you don't feel odd going to go pick up your kids from school or go to a sports day, etc. And we are at EY trying to get more female leaders into a visible position so that other women within the workplace can see. And I think these are a couple of examples of practical steps that organizations can and should be doing. Of course, I won't talk about mentorship, allyship, or sponsorship because it's been mentioned already, but those are so key and important to support women with progressing up the career ladder.
Thank you. And I'm just going to go back to you, Alan, because I was interested to understand a bit more about City and Guilds frameworks of how you might help organizations to set up something like that if they weren't already set up. I just noticed that you have something called the Assured Benchmark Quality Framework. Do you have any good practices you can share as to how organizations can get on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Eleanor. So you're absolutely right. Our recognition schemes, such as the Assured one that you mentioned, which essentially is measuring the context in which, say, it's a training program or something like that that's been developed internally, how it meets those benchmarks and that good practice that that we hold for 140 odd years. So actually, there's been many programs, and actually a few in the UAE which have been focused around that good practice that we've just been describing, such as Women in Leadership, and then being able to have that program essentially benchmarked and recognized as being good quality, that it is also then supporting pathways into further advancement in careers, or just for whether it's that personal recognition. It's so important that we're able to advocate that, and the use of the kind of association with an organization like ourselves, or it could be through our ILM brand, always really helps, I think, to showcase. And I think that is part of the discussion today around that advocacy and recognition and visibility that really helps to, kind of propel some of these programs that could be otherwise, kind of just not getting that same traction and visibility that they deserve.
Absolutely. And Jonathan, I'd love to hear a bit more from a top-down perspective. I guess some of the government policies or practices that needs to be implemented in order to encourage that and to ultimately successfully support women retention and advancement in these industries that we're talking about. Are you able to talk a little bit about how governments can do this?
Thanks so much. I think there is a role for government in terms of shaping how businesses operate, and that's around things like work policies and wage policies. So this is about, as already mentioned, the flexible working policies, and I think helping women balance caregiving responsibilities, because many have that responsibility that they hold so dear, and that's important. And that encourages many companies to have flexible work models, and that results in higher retention of female talent, but also opening up doors into careers where those kind of things would never have happened in the past, because women felt excluded because of their caregiving responsibilities. So I think that's a driver from government. I think the other part is about equality around things like paid parental leave, so that's across the board. And again, linked to caregiving responsibilities and reducing penalties for mothers around, national insurance contributions and closing the gaps and things like that when they've taken time out. Really, really important. I think having really gender neutral policies generally across government's really important. So UK government is really strong on equality, diversity and inclusion. And I don't just mean that in a kind of, blasé language. A lot of the policies are looked at through that lens to make sure that they are actually tapping into all the cohorts, and women being one of those cohorts that we need to make sure are well covered and included within policies. So, everything we look at is through that lens. And I think that's really, really important. We've already talked about, mentorship and sponsorship programs. But I would go on to say about in relation to the wage part, making sure that we have transparent promotion and pay processes in organisations is really important. So for me, there's stuff at the government level that needs to be done in terms of policies and practice, and then, stuff at the kind of institutional level. And I would put that institutional level as well around trade bodies, CBI, organisations like that, organisations like Bradley's, really making sure that they have policies too that follow that same kind of vein. And looking at, if we come back to the pay part, this transparent promotion and pay processes, when people have to start publishing their wage bills for executives and you start seeing how many women are on boards and stuff like that, attention gets attention, right? So that's really what you have to kind of push on. And that's, I guess, one of the areas that, government is always trying to get people to do is to think about, that transparent process. So regular audits will help close the gaps and making sure there's clear criteria that reduces bias and favoritism. And I think, we talk about, giving women or any other cohort. So, I deal with special education needs and all sorts of different things. If you're going to go after them groups to encourage them, you've got to speak their language and it's really got to be in tune to it. You can't just say, well, it's open to everybody and hope that, women or other groups come to the pass, as it were. You've really got to kind of make it accessible and encourage them and really make them want to do it. So I think there's a lot of work around that kind of enablement. Leadership and development has already been mentioned, and there are lots of examples of women in leadership programs. The Chartered Management Institute do brilliant programs around women in leadership and management. ILM do the same. There's lots of sector skills councils as well that will run women in leadership in hospitality and all sorts of different areas as well. So there's some great stuff out there that's being done that really follows down from that. And I think finally, I think it's around pushing on accountability on diversity goals. So tying executive compensation and performance metrics to gender diversity outcomes drives a real commitment. And I think, we should be paying the men based on how many women are involved in the whole management structure and how many are at the top end. So, if you did that, you'd have a bit more attention, I think, on diversity, and that's really important. And I think, which we'll talk about at some point as well, is the anti-bias around training and inclusive culture initiatives. So making sure that training managers recognise and mitigate unconscious bias in hiring and reviews and meetings and that whole recruitment process. And was already mentioned as well, around employee resource groups, communities, building communities for women to support and share experiences themselves, but also actually use that as a vehicle to educate men. So I don't think it's kind of just for women. That's a educate men policy. So there's a broad brush of things that can be done. Some are driven by government, but only to get in companies and trade associations and that pushing on the same messages. Because once you get momentum, it should keep going as long as those benchmarking comparators are in place and people are paid according to equality and diversity.
Thank you. And I think now is time to sort of pivot to talking about building the next generation a little bit more and understanding a little bit about that. And I just thought I should plug in a few stats about the UAE side, because I think it's really impressive what the UAE government has been doing to build a pipeline of talent. Having lived and worked in the UAE for 7 years, it's really always impressive to sort of see graduates from all nationalities, but a lot of young Emirati women. And according to a report by UNESCO, there's 34 to 57% of STEM grads in Arab countries are women. In the UAE, that's something like 25%, which is fantastic. And I do think that there is a strong culture associated in the UAE, especially with getting into engineering roles. It's culturally sort of lauded to sort of get into an engineering or a physics or mathematical role, especially with leaders and astronauts going into space to sort of showcase what women can do. So I think it's really impressive what the UAE has done with programs like NAFI's program as well, to empower Emiratis working in the private sector, has led to a 300% increase in Emirati women taking up work in the private sector. So the next question, I guess, for Samantha, being in the private sector, I'd be keen to hear a bit more about how you grow a strong pipeline of talent. Is it quotas? Is it representation? Is it culture? How do you attract that next pipeline of female talent?
I think it's called doing the right thing and leadership, isn't it? But I think if we just look at sort of some basic stats, we still see coming out of sort of postgraduate level, 50% gender split and sort of fairly even in the workplace. And then as we see that reducing dramatically as we go up the hierarchy until we reach, as little as 15% of women at board level. And there is a reason for that. And there's a reason that women opt out of progression or working altogether. And that is because workplaces need fixing. And I think it's really important that we understand the difference between workplaces needing fixing and women needing fixing. Women do not need fixing. And I've sort of been itching, to come into the conversation on mentoring since Jonathan first brought it up, just because I'm from a different school of thought in terms of, if women have got a lack of confidence in the workplace, it's because we've got structural and cultural workplace issues. It's not because they need a mentor to tell them to be confident. So I think that's really important in terms of sort of a cultural behaviour and an understanding. But in terms of how we sort of move on from that, and as a private company, how we build that sort of baseline pipeline of female talent, you need to help build the pipeline from the ground up. And so what we do is we're trying to lead by example, and we're partnering and engaging with schools and universities, educational institutions to sort of run programs so for example, in Sharjah, we have an air traffic control contract in Sharjah, and we are partnering with the universities there to actually work with them to build a degree, because there's no degree that people can do as it stands at the minute. And in Saudi as well, we're looking at starting a firefighters basic initial course, looking at bringing nationals in Saudi and women into that sort of skill set. We already actually have a number of women acting as firefighters in Saudi. We're working really hard to profile those women and show younger people within educational institutions still what good looks like in organisations and why they should go into those what are usually male dominated sort of skill sets and roles, because they can actually see how that plays out and they can actually see that would be a good thing for them. So I think, you know, as I said at the start, private companies need to be leading by example. We need to be showing that this is a fundamental part of leadership. And I think Fazila mentioned that earlier. You know, this is not ED&I is not a bolt on to what we do. It's a fundamental part of being a leader. So if you want that culture in your business and you want to experience the benefits of a truly diverse team, then you really need to be leading from the top and not accepting anything less.
I love that. That's great. Jonathan, I'd love to pivot to you just to understand a little bit more about industry partnerships, educational partnerships, and perhaps is there a UAE UK link here to collaborate? As you know, there's a lot of UK universities in the UAE at the moment, but also a lot of UAE nationals studying in the UK and coming back. So what is the opportunity here to partner?
There are loads of opportunities, but I just kind of divert your attention just away from universities, because it's not just the universities. People need skills to do jobs. 90% of jobs do not need a degree. And so actually, you know, chasing degrees just makes people clever with no job. What we actually need are the right skills for the job. Sorry, it's my big beef that we chase degrees for a pointless end. So I think it doesn't matter what the skill is, let's do the right skill for the right person in the right job. And that means aligning education programs, you know, thinking about co-developing curriculum with gender equality and equity in mind, and making sure that they're aligned to industry needs, especially in kind of STEM subjects. So, you know, science, technology, engineering, maths, leadership fields where women are really underrepresented and are really pushing to do more and be more. And I think this is where, you know, the fixing of the institution is absolutely right, but that starts with fixing the curriculum. And so, you know, UK government, for example, has a program that operates in many countries around the world called SAGE, which is aimed at getting, you know, girls into education in the first place, and then following that through primary, secondary, post-16 programs, you know, to make it normalized as much as possible. Because, you know, many countries that I work in, you know, women in education is you know, really difficult. So I think this kind of gender inclusive stance is really, really key from the very outset. I think the industry part is about building case studies and role models that normalize participation as well. So, you know, tech companies, for example, working with universities and colleges and training providers to incorporate AI and data science models that feature diverse innovators, you know, not just the men of the world that are doing this, but, you know, all walks of life, but particularly focusing on women. I think the other part of this is around, there could be more, you know, focused on, you know, women in leadership, but women in programs generally that are, and open up doors to, you know, funded scholarships and outreach for girls and women, you know, targeting funding towards women. Because I think if you're looking to attract a group of people, right, if you know, you've really got to go after that group of people and change the language and look at all the kind of bags that come with it in terms of the terms and conditions and benefits and all of that. It's all got to be orientated towards females. You can't just have a program that says we accept anybody and hope that those people come to the pass, because that's not going to happen. You've really got to chase them. And I think education programs need to be designed in that way that particularly go after it. And Samantha and others, you know, talking about different education programs, that pipeline of programs and early talent identification is really key for all people, but, you know, for women, that, you know, some brilliance in what they do, and we should make sure that we're tapping into that as early as possible, and making sure that industry are building those long-term partnerships with education providers that track students from an early year, you know, early high school all the way through to, you know, college, university, and going out to the world of work. And there are a number of programs, you know, that already do some of that, but it needs to be more. And Alan's talked about this, you know, in City and Guilds, they're really strong on making sure that there's, you know, no bias within their programs. But no bias doesn't mean you're after women necessarily. It just removes bias. What you've got to do is be positive and proactive towards, you know, those programs being orientated towards females. I think the other part is really around, you know, joint research. Lots of brilliant research coming out of universities and other organizations, but actually a bit more on joint research around barriers and solutions for women in specific industries would be really good. And in, as I say, in the mining sector and the construction sector, for example, and in engineering, you know, there are programs for young people to, you know, to attract women into STEM subjects and engineering subjects and such like, and then follow that through. So it's not just kind of in one part of their education pathway, it's in all the pathway, all the way through. So that it becomes a normal route to work and it's normal for everybody, and it doesn't become stigmatized in any way, shape or form. And I think, really, we just need to look at those industry partnerships that, Samantha's described, for example, where, it's leadership down that takes responsibility for that if you want to change your organisation. And it needs to go beyond branding. It needs to go beyond flashy targets and news headlines. And it's got to be, measurable and accountable long term, and it's got to be high impact. And if you're not achieving high impact, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. I'd love to hear a bit about how City and Guilds is helping with that early pipeline. But also, just conscious of time, I'm also keen to sort of talk a little bit about AI and how that's going to be changing the workforce moving forward. In fact, LinkedIn just released a report on skills on the rise that shows that between 2015 and 2030, 70% of the skills used in most jobs will change because of AI as a catalyst. And so adaptability, it sounds, is probably the key here. And I'd love to hear about how engineering specifically or these sort of more vocational skills will be affected by that. So if you could talk a little bit about how City and Guilds will help orientate that future.
Sure. And I think just in terms of how I think we're breaking down barriers as an organization, I did just want to just quickly mention that, I think it was mentioned earlier about leading by example, because I think that absolutely sets the scene. And actually, for the first time in City and Guilds history, we have a female CEO, Kirsty Donnelly, MBE. We have a female chair, Dame Anne Lim, and a female president, which is the Princess Royal, who I mentioned earlier. So 3 amazing leaders, and I think that is setting the scene for our own organisation. I think it's about 60% of our workforce is female as well. So that absolutely helps, I think, to lead by example, setting the tone of how we think about and support women in skills. And as a skills organisation, that's very much at the heart of what we're looking for. And in the short term, it's about us recognising those programmes, the things Jonathan was mentioning around earlier in terms of our development, but also holding up and recognising the incremental changes. And there's a number of podcasts, etc., that we undertake, which I'll share the links to again just normalize. I think that was mentioned earlier, what we've been discussing today. But in terms of Ellen, for the future, I think I feel AI is the subject of on everybody's lips at the moment, isn't it? In terms of how it can support us, but also I think kind of looking at in the context of skills shortages and being able to kind of have a really deep understanding of where we are heading, not just for AI and how it could help within our different sectors, but also playing that alongside the skills landscape and thinking about the challenges that we have globally around skills shortages and how that plays into skills migration can really support the thinking behind where AI, I think, can add value. And of course, in terms of the conversation today, I think it's about us being forewarned, if you like, in terms of understanding those nuances that'll help us to create pathways and appropriate learning content and appropriate education pathways that recognize the benefits of AI, but also supporting the more country wide needs from a skills perspective.
Yeah. Fazella, I just wanted to touch on some of the work that you might have done. I mean, have you seen AI sort of pathways becoming more dominant in some of the clients that you work with, and what are some good examples of that?
Yeah, for sure. So within EY Academy and within my remit, what we are doing is supporting with talent development. And within that, one of our main portfolios is not just accounting and finance, it is AI. Now, what's been interesting to see is the amount of organizations that are coming to ask for AI for C-suite. AI for leaders. And then it goes into the really sort of technical sort of AI programs, whether that's Python or whether that's other stuff like data analytics or looking at robotic process automation. So there is a lot out there right now, and a big need for AI literacy, that whole AI and upskilling ourselves. I think in Europe, they have mandated that organizations that give tools, AI tools, the employers have to support employees with training. And that's what we can see here across the region as well. So AI is impacting the future of many different professions, and I can speak about the accounting and finance profession predominantly, but there is an area, and this is not just about women or men, this is about all of us in general. We need to upskill ourselves with understanding the pros and cons, how to use it, the benefits, and what it means for the future of all of our professions.
And Samantha, I'd love to just see if Serco was using it, in a way to support the workforce, and how it's impacted your workforce and your sector specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're using it in a number of places across the business. We're using it in safety, in terms of, we have a real issue with road safety in remote areas in Saudi Arabia, and we're using telematics with sort of AI layered over the top of it to give us real-time information on where the hotspots are for dangerous areas and that type of thing. But we're also using it within our engineering services for predictive maintenance. So what we see is a more proactive approach to maintenance of assets, and what that allows us to do is to become more efficient with our frontline staff and potentially sort of reduce numbers or divert them somewhere else. I don't really see it making a big difference in terms of sort of gender split or equality in terms of AI specifically, but it's certainly making us a more efficient business.
Great. Well, I think the point is hopefully women will be more attracted to come into male-dominated sectors, because there are jobs that are perhaps a little bit more not on the field and more in the computing. So hopefully there is a positive light that can come out of the AI revolution in terms of job creation, and we would hope that females can upskill in that area as an opportunity, because there is a huge rise in jobs and a need for people with AI skills. So this, I guess, nicely rounds up our conversation. I think what I'd love to quickly do is do a really quick recap of your top thoughts and takeaways from today, and what you would like the viewers to sort of keep in mind. So I'll start with you, Samantha, since you're still on screen, and we'll go around to Fazella after that.
Yeah, sure. So for me, I guess it's all around the leading by example, and specifically, not a lot of what's been talked about. It's not women that we're looking to fix, it's workplaces, and you do that through workplace structure changes and policy changes and cultural changes, not by mentoring women or creating women in leadership programs. We shouldn't have to have those things, and then this will not be a conversation anymore, which will be a wonderful day when that happens.
Thank you. Fazella, your takeaway thoughts, please.
I think, first of all, we as women have to be our own cheerleaders, and it's about being visible. And my key sort of takeaway is that I don't want this conversation happening in 10, 15 years' time for my daughter. So then what are women like us doing today so that future for our girls is that they are not sitting here talking about the same topic, which I'm sure we've been speaking about for the last 20, 25 years. And 100% concur with what Samantha said. It's not about just how we need to change this, the whole workplace, but that's going to change when there's education done for everybody within an organization, and the tone has to be set from the top.
Thank you. So, Jonathan, I'll pivot to you next with your final thoughts, please.
Thank you so much. Been a really interesting conversation, and lots of good messages to take away already. I think I'd start with challenging men, and I think from an education and skills perspective, it's about the right skills for the right job, regardless of who has them. That includes women. You're part of society, so why should it be any different? And I think it's about the designers of education pathways, whether at preschool, primary, secondary, or post 16, really building inequality, diversity, and inclusiveness in a proactive way, not just in a kind of an unbiased, norm way. It's really got to be proactive to really do more to include women in, men's world, men's jobs, and it's not just men's jobs, they're everybody's jobs, but, that's the kind of perception that's out there. So we can only smash that with a really proactive, unbiased approach.
Thank you. And last but not least, Alan, would you like to share some thoughts?
Thank you, Eleanor. I echo, I think, everything that my fellow panelists have just described. I think so many great examples of positivity, but I think we need to accelerate the rate of change. I think we need to move faster. And I think doing that, for me, the takeaway is, that kind of leading by example, normalizing, and the Jonathan just summed it up really well in terms of education for men as well. And I think that's a really important aspect for us to take away.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much to all my panelists. I think my takeaway was that there are some fantastic examples of leadership of government policies in both the UAE and the UK, and they are doing well. But as you said, Ellen, I think more could be done faster. But I'm very excited about how AI can help us to upskill when you're looking to upskill and to pivot or to change industry. So I think that there's a lot of hope for how AI can help people, women, to find the time to learn if they were looking to change into different industries, as I have, and to sort of take the lead from female leaders like the ones on the panel today. So thank you so much, Brad, for hosting us. I'll pass it back to you to conclude. Brad, I'll remind you there you go.
Well, thank you very much, Eleanor, and to all of our panelists. I mean, that was such a rich, insightful discussion with so many great ideas. And we covered so many areas. We looked at issues of policy, practice, and the change of attitudes that are required in order to sort of for women to fulfill their potential in the workplace. I think the reason why we convened this webinar is because as a business council, we see that both the UAE and the UK are real pioneers in terms of moving the dial, in terms of inclusion and empowerment of women in the workplace, particularly in terms of thought leadership and delivery in practice. You mentioned, for example, Eleanor, the fact that the NAFIS program in the UAE has led to an increase of 300% in terms of the number of Emirati women in the workplace in the private sector. And you also mentioned the large proportion of Emirati women now undertaking their engineering degrees. So there's really great examples there from the UAE as well as from the UK. We're going to capture all of the discussion points from this webinar in the white paper that we're going to be publishing in November. That white paper will feature case studies, hopefully from all of you, and also recommendations to government and the business community in the UAE and the UK on how we can partner together to address some of the systemic challenges that still exist in this area. But finally, I'd just like to remind our viewers that a recorded version of this webinar will be uploaded immediately onto our YouTube channel. So for those of you, your colleagues who weren't able to watch the live broadcast, there'll be a recorded version to watch. But thank you ever so much to all of our speakers today for a really great discussion. And we look forward to taking this forward to you as we publish our paper later in the year. Thank you very much.